The sound is gone out. The sound is gone out into all lands, into all lands. And the words.
We take a pause from the flashbacks that we've gotten from this young couple on their way to Egypt, thinking about the Magi, thinking about Anna, and thinking about Simeon. And we go now to the teller of the story, a man named Luke. Now, we're familiar with Luke as one of the four Gospels. Matthew, Mark, and Luke have a similar flavor. They're called the Synoptics. John is its own animal completely, and that he's the only, as far as we know, non-Jewish writer of the Bible. We don't know if he was a part of a family that had interest in Judaism, that perhaps they were converts to Judaism. All we know is that he received the message of Jesus and reproduced that message in the Bible. His words between the Gospel and the book of Acts fill up nearly a quarter of the entire New Testament. We see him in the book of Acts as a friend of Paul, and there are several passages where he goes from talking about he, Paul, to we, Paul and I. And so we know that he went with Paul for much of his trips. We also know that near the end of Paul's life, Luke was one of the faithful companions that stayed with him, that took care of him before Paul was killed by the Romans, before Paul was martyred. Most scholars think that Luke was from a major city north of Jerusalem, the main Roman city in the area. It was called Antioch, or Syrian Antioch. And so it's quite likely that Luke was part of the first large Gentile gathering, the first large Gentile church of Jesus followers. It was a significant church. It was the place where Barnabas eventually became a part of. It's a place where Barnabas got a hold of Paul and said, you got to check out this church. And Paul left his town, traveled east quite a few miles to join and become a part of Luke's church, the church in Antioch. And it appears that Luke went and interviewed Mary, spent some time with her, and heard a lot of details about the early days of Jesus, about the days just before the birth of Jesus that are not recorded in the other Gospels. They think the Gospel of Luke was written somewhere between the year 60 and 80 AD, a good 30 to 60 years after the death of Christ. What this probably means is that Luke interviewed a very old woman. If he interviewed her right around 60 AD, she would have been 75 or so already at that time. So we have this awesome picture of a very old lady revered in the early church as the woman who gave birth to and raised God, the Messiah, and somebody who would have been able to talk about people long gone. An old man named Zechariah and her old relative, a woman named Elizabeth. And he no doubt would have heard her tenderly talk about those early days with Joseph, the visits from the shepherds and the Magi, the flight to Egypt. The original apostles were beginning to die off. They were beginning to get killed. The story had to be preserved. The story had to be maintained. And through Luke, the sound went out and still goes out today, as Handel says, goes out today into all the world.
And their words unto the end.